The Billionaire's Marriage Contract, written by Melody Archer, narrated by Lorna Faith. Chapter 1. How can you ask me to marry again? Jack Walker Stevenson knelt by his great-grandfather's grave in a quiet corner of Paradise Lake's cemetery. His voice sounded raw to his own ears. You always were a stubborn old coot, Grand, but forcing me to marry by my 27th birthday to receive my inheritance is simply too much. Making that old silver mine my own is something I've wanted for years, but I can't let myself fall in love only to be rejected again. Don't you remember what happened with Ellen? Memories haunted Jack of the woman he'd married during his wild college days. Ellen had been beautiful and full of life. After a whirlwind romance, they flew to Las Vegas and eloped. Jack had been convinced she loved him as much as he loved her. Only 6 months into their marriage, he had discovered just how fickle his new wife's love really was. Jack hadn't realized how obsessed Ellen was about appearances, or more specifically, how he appeared to her friends. Her image was something his wife fixated on relentlessly, which was why she used him to fix her image. She had used him to pay off her gambling debts. She'd even refused to discuss the idea of children with him. Her youth, her beauty, that she had known would be fleeting, she tried to hold on to with a fierce grip. She had been determined to hold on to it at any cost. These were details he had found out after they were married. After she lied to him, Jack lost a lot of trust. Yet, he'd wanted to do whatever it took to make their marriage work, especially after he found out she was pregnant. Jack's brows puckered as he remembered what had been the final straw. It was why his wife had left him. He'd been at a science fair and had chased down a thug to save a teenager from a kidnapping and whatever horrible fate waited her. He traced a finger down the scar on his right cheek, a reward for his efforts. Jack could still picture the look of revulsion on Ellen's face when the stitches came out. Her words haunted him still. I can't see this day after day, Jack. I mean, before you looked sort of like a rugged modern-day Tarzan, which I liked, but now you look awful. You look horrible. You look beastly. I can't be with you. Not anymore. The next day, she had left a handwritten note on the kitchen counter to let him know she was leaving. His wife had been 7 months pregnant at the time. The police called him late the next night to tell him his wife had been hit by another vehicle in a car accident and died instantly, as had their unborn son. Jack turned his head and caught sight of the tiny grave in the Stevenson family plot. His gut clenched in tight knots. There had been too much loss, too much emptiness, too much pain. Angrily, he wiped away a lone tear that slipped down his cheek. Dark clouds hovered above the small town's skyline. Thunder rumbled and raindrops splattered onto his face, following the length of his scar. The light raindrops were soothing, cleansing the traces of wedged-in dirt that had been pressed into his palms. His large St. Bernard dog nudged his shoulder, licking his cheek, the roughness of his tongue a healing salve against the pain. Jack squatted and draped an arm around his furry companion, pulling him close. Without warning, a familiar voice interrupted the silence. I saw today's date and thought I'd find you here, Jack. Jack stood to his feet, turning as his brother approached him. Yeah, here I am. Adam pulled Jack into a swift hug before standing at his side. Sorry it's been a little rough for you this time of year, Jack. Jack swung his gaze back to the graves in front of him. Even though it's been 4 years, for some reason this year seems more difficult than usual. Jack rubbed a hand along the stubble of his chin, his voice low and gravelly. I miss what could have been. Adam didn't speak, but only nodded and listened. Jack was grateful for that. Somehow, his brother's presence offered more support than any words could. Shifting his feet, Jack slipped his thumbs in the belt loops of his jeans. With my 27th birthday just around the corner, and Grand's will staring me in the face, I'll admit today has felt like a stomach punch. Jack, you don't have to go through on Grand's will requirements. I know, Adam, Jack sighed. Problem is, I want Grand Silvermine way too much to pass it up, but I also don't want to marry again, which leaves me at an impasse. Adam cocked his head to the side and looked at him. Maybe you just need to do what I did and find a woman who will agree to a marriage in name only for a year. Maybe. Problem is, that whole not falling in love plan backfired on you, Adam. That's true, but I wouldn't trade marrying Al for the world. Adam's contented look was as disturbing as it was annoying. A quick surge of jealousy rose to the surface at his brother's happiness, which Jack quickly tamped down. He was glad for Adam. He deserved happiness, but 4 years ago he believed that kind of happiness was possible for him too, and that went horribly wrong. No, that kind of soul-satisfying love wasn't going to happen for him. I'm happy for you, Adam. I really am. But somehow I just don't see that happening for me. I think you might be surprised at how the right woman simply shows up when it's your turn for love, Jack. The corner of Adam's lips turned up into a knowing smile. His brother might have found the right woman, but it didn't seem possible for him. Jack needed some girl who wouldn't mind living in the mountains at least some of the time. She'd have to be part tomboy and part crazy to marry him. Most of all, he needed a woman who wouldn't run away as far and as fast as they could at the sight of his scar. No, Jack couldn't see himself finding a woman to love any time soon. Love just wasn't possible. Not for him. A loud crack of thunder rang out above their heads, and the sky opened up, pouring down rain. That's our cue to head on home. Jack turned and whistled for his dog. Brahms, here, boy. His large dog turned away from chasing some birds to run after Jack as he walked to his truck. Adam opened his truck door and turned to face him. I'll pick up Al and meet you at your place. The family's already gathered there, waiting to see you. All right, Adam. See you there. Jack sighed and opened the door. Brahms jumped in, skidding to the passenger seat on the other side. His dog shook his thick fur coat, spraying water all over Jack's face and arms. He picked up the towel he kept in his truck and dried him off. As he drove out of their small town and up the back road that led to his mountain home, he exhaled a slow breath as he thought of his loving and protective family. They had decided to show up today because they didn't want him to have to go through this difficult day alone. As grateful as he was for his family's love and concern, Jack found it somewhat annoying that he needed them. His pride bristled that after 4 years, this day still crippled him emotionally. It frustrated Jack that he was so predictable, that he needed his family's support on this day every year. Driving up the gravel road, a glimpse of his massive 12-bedroom log home at the top of the hill was like a homing beacon to him. The large 20,000-square-foot house was built on top of a mountain 20 miles away from the nearest town. Here he was far away from critical eyes. Here he was far away from sharp tongues. Here he was far away from the possibility of anyone poking at the walls around his bruised heart. For Jack, this was his safe zone, which was why he had made the house so huge in the first place. He used the entire west wing for himself. He built this house as a private oasis, which included a spacious bedroom, a large office, a few guest bedrooms, library, media room, gym, and swimming pool. He stopped at the iron gate, punched in the security code, and drove through to his 6-car garage. Another click of the button opened the garage door. Only his family knew the security code. Brahms, come here, boy. He whistled for his dog, whose massive body pounded towards him. It's time for your shower. Jack had installed a small dog shower when he had the house built. It was made for days like this when it rained, so his dog wouldn't track dirt and mud all over the house. Grabbing the towel, he started to dry off his dog, but Brahms was too quick. I've got him, sir. Benedict Coggins picked up the towel and held Brahms by his collar. As usual, his resolute personal assistant was right where he needed him. He'd been running this house since Jack designed and built it 3 years ago. Jack realized how dependent he was on Ben. It wasn't something he liked to see in himself, but he was grateful for Ben's help. "Thanks, Ben." "Your family is in the great room, sir. Mrs. Potter has already served snacks and set the rest of the food and drinks on the large kitchen table." Ben finished drying off his dog and Brahms ran off down the hall. "Is there anything else you need, sir?" "Not right now. Thank you, Ben." "Very good, sir." Ben nodded once before hurrying to his next task. Jack walked down the hall to the great room. The home's structure had allowed for a vast open expanse, 20 feet high, with beams that stretched from floor to ceiling. The arching pillars and open space had reminded Jack of a cathedral's ability to capture heaven. Its towering expanse cried security and sanctuary. Walking past the open French doors that led to the conservatory, he inhaled the sweet scent of roses that permeated the hallway. He planned to cut a rose for his mum and a rose for Elle before they left for home. The sun shone through the kitchen and dining room, spreading cheer throughout the house. As he entered the dining area, he walked past his cook, Mrs. Potter, and her grandson Chipper. The two of them were carrying pans of finger sandwiches, muffins, and other goodies to the large dining table and side table. "Just let me know if there's anything else you need, Mr. Stevenson." "It sure smells good. Thanks, Mrs. Potter and Chipper." Jack nodded at them as they hurried back into the kitchen. He turned and walked toward his family, seated at the kitchen counter and table, talking with one another. "Jack, you're here. I'm glad." His mother saw him first and slid off the stool where she sat by the kitchen counter. She walked over to him, giving him one of her comforting hugs. "Ah, Mom, it's good to see you." Jack wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, taking in a moment of childlike serenity. "You didn't have to drive all the way here today, Mom." "Jack, we wanted to be here for you. Family sticks together." The slight shimmer of moisture in his mom's eyes told him how important he was to her. "Thanks, Mom. I appreciate it." He could always count on his mom to be there for him. That was something for which he was very grateful. "Are you doing okay, Jack?" Eliza Stevenson persisted. It hadn't changed much since he was a young boy until now. He knew his mom well enough to know she would continue to ask questions until she was satisfied. "It was a tougher day, but I'm doing good. It helps to be with family." Jack kissed his mom's cheek, happy when the shimmer of tears was replaced by a big smile. "Good, I'm glad." "Hey, Jack." Gabe called from where he sipped a cup of coffee, leaning one hip against the kitchen island. Behind him sat Luke and Zach, who nodded and then went back to their deep discussion. "Don't you guys have anything better to do on a Saturday?" Jack forced himself into a lighter mood as he gave them each a fist bump. "Apparently not. For some reason we care more about you, Jack, than the latest Seahawks game." Gabe shot him a grin. Jack walked over to the coffee maker and started measuring out the coffee grounds to make another pot of coffee. "You didn't have to take time out of your busy schedule to show up here today, Gabe." Jack knew his brother. Usually Gabe's life was so well organized that he didn't go out of his way unless it was really important. "I wanted to. You're my brother, and I care about you, Jack. So how has it really been going today?" His brother's bright blue eyes seemed to see through him like a targeted laser beam. He was annoyed that his brother understood him so well. It's also probably what made Gabe so good at all that personal development stuff he did. Jack rubbed the back of his neck. "To answer your question, I've done a lot of thinking today. Not much of it was good." He grabbed a coffee cup and poured the hot brown liquid near to the brim. Lifting it, he took a sip, peering over the rim at his brother. "That's what I thought, Jack." Gabe finished drinking his coffee and set the mug in the sink. "We're here for you, man. Anytime you want to talk." Suddenly, the door opened and Adam walked into the room with his very pregnant wife by his side. Adam, are you sure you should be bringing your lovely wife anywhere at this late date? Jack kissed his sister-in-law on the cheek. He did his best not to let any worries show. You try telling my wife anything, Jack. She makes up her own mind, and I don't relish the thought of sleeping on the couch. Adam slapped him on the back. Jack, I'll be fine. You and Adam both worry too much. Al waddled over to the fridge and poured herself an orange juice. Carrying the cool drink, Al walked over to the picture that sat on the fireplace mantel. It was a photo of Jack and Ellen. She had been 4 months pregnant at the time. A friend had taken that picture on his smartphone because Jack wanted to record every detail to show his son when he was older. Sadly, that wasn't to be. Do you still miss them, Jack? I miss what could have been. Jack sighed, wondering how Al managed to always get him to answer her probing questions. Well, I think that's normal after 4 years. Maybe. Jack didn't want things to be normal. He wanted to stop feeling the pain of his loss and loneliness. Still, he was glad his mom and grandparents didn't know all the details of what happened those last few days before his wife and unborn child died. Perhaps someday he'd tell them what really happened. Al walked over to sit on a chair next to her husband, her hand toying with Adam's. Do you still want the inheritance Grand left you, Jack? Adam sipped his coffee, peering up at him over the rim. Yeah, I do, but I have just one problem. There's no girlfriend. Jack shrugged half-heartedly and slipped his hands in his pockets. Well, about that, Al looked at her husband, who nodded before her gaze moved back to Jack. I thought maybe it would be a good idea to invite guests to a private dinner right here. It might help move things along. Things. She meant it might help get his life moving along. Jack couldn't fault her for trying. He'd spent a lot of years just getting by in this cave-like existence. He'd found a comfortable rhythm here, which was why he pushed back against change. I don't think I want to know, Al. Jack sighed, knowing Al would tell him the details anyway. I know, Jack, but we want to help. Al took a sip of her orange juice and began. We were thinking of inviting some of my friends and some people both you and Adam know. We made a list. I hate schmoozing, Al. I don't even get out much except once a week to go to the office and the occasional benefit gala. Jack flicked away a stray piece of lint on his sleeve with impatience. If I need to network with people, I invite them here to my own turf. I know, but this is important, Jack. Jack realized his sister-in-law would keep pestering him until he gave in. He didn't want to meet people. He didn't want to get close to others. He didn't want to feel that kind of pain again. But maybe if he did this, then Al would get off his back about trying to set him up. All right, let's see the list. Jack could feel the pulse at the base of his throat as he grabbed the piece of paper. His finger slowly trailed down the list of names, some of whom he recognized. You'll see 3 friends of mine that you haven't met yet on that list. Jack groaned inwardly. Since they're your friends, Al, go ahead and invite them. Jack inhaled a deep breath and blew it out slowly. I'll meet them, but I can't make any promises that it'll go any further. I understand, Jack. Al's gaze burned into his. Does that mean you're okay with me sending these invitations? He nodded once. You organize everything, Al, and I'll be here. Jack surprised himself as the words flew from his lips. He grimaced. He was not looking forward to this. Good. Thanks, Jack. Al looked up, a pink glow on her cheeks and a large grin on her face. Let's plan this dinner so it will happen in 2 weeks. I'll talk to your event coordinator, Maisie Merriweather, and we'll get these sent out quickly. That will give everyone enough time to rearrange their calendars. I'll invite some of Adam's and your friends too, Jack. Al took out her smartphone and started typing notes. Jack agreed to the extra invitations, but the reason was to make Al happy more than anything else. He didn't have high expectations of meeting a woman whom he would want as his fake wife. One thing was for sure. He would be relieved when this dinner was over and done. "I hope you're ready to battle with the wolves to get what you want, Jack." Alex, one of his associate architects, eyed him and grabbed a drink from a waiter who made his way through the maze of people. "I'm ready." Jack walked over to welcome the members of Paradise Lake Land Development Office. He hated schmoozing at these events, but it needed to be done so he could get the go-ahead for the adventure park his team was designing. "Mayor Rainey, glad you could meet with us today to discuss plans." "Well, Jack, your idea intrigued me, but don't get too hopeful. You need to convince us first." Leah Rainey looked around the room at the men and women who stood by her side, each one nodding their agreement. She was surrounded by her yes men and women. "I figured there would need to be some discussion, and that's why we're here." Jack was confident that the Paradise Lake Planning Council would soon see that his proposal was as good for the town as it was for him. "If you'll all follow me to the large media room, we can begin." "This ought to be good." Bert Wolf snorted and looked at his brother Bart, who shook his head and chuckled. They were Mayor Rainey's closest advisors and open opponents to Jack's planned development. Jack led everyone into the large media room that was located just off the great room. He had this room built just in case he needed a large conference room for group meetings. Mrs. Potter stood there organizing the coffee and snacks on the side table. She nodded to Jack and hurried out of the room. Ben followed her and closed the double doors behind him. "Help yourself to coffee or tea, find a spot at the table, and we'll start the presentation shortly." Jack motioned to the massive boardroom table that seated 30 people. With the press of a button, a panel slid up to the ceiling, revealing a white screen. Jack opened the laptop and located the slides for his presentation. Opening his mouth to speak, Jack paused. Bella Campbell, his Creative Works project manager, walked in with his samples. "Jack, here are the newest design mock-ups you asked for." Bella handed him a bunch of samples of the ideas they came up with. "Thanks, Bella. Looks like everything is good to go. Alex?" Alex stood to her feet and welcomed everyone to the meeting. Jack had hired her to be the face of Stevenson Creative Works, since his own face seemed to repel most people. Normally, he didn't show up for these meetings, but this was his passion project. He needed to be here. "And now, Jack Stevenson will share his vision for this project." Alex's gaze moved to Jack, and he stood to his feet, walking to the front of the room. Jack began. "The Rose Adventure Park was inspired by a few people in my life. One of them was my own mother, whose childhood was filled with abuse and neglect. I wanted to find a way to bring a little happiness back into the lives of children. That's how the idea for this theme park was born." Jack slowly scrolled through the slides showing their designs of fun and unique rides for children. "A favorite ride of mine is the pirate ship that floats on a river of water that encircles the enchanted castle. The ship runs on underwater cables, so the children are safe. The ship also sails under the castle, where the children get to see and explore hidden treasure." Jack pointed toward the castle and the water moat located in the center of the adventure park. It had many different rides, restaurants, and stores for kids on the outskirts of the adventure park. "These are well-thought-out designs for this adventure park, Jack. My question is, why should the Paradise Lake Town Council approve these changes to land development? What possible benefit would this bring to our quiet town?" Mayor Rainey eyed Jack pointedly, sipping her coffee as she waited for his answer. Bart Wolf, one of the mayor's henchmen, spoke up. "It looks to me like this development idea would only bring unnecessary traffic and noise to our peaceful town." "It's important to consider all aspects of a project to make a good decision, don't you think, Bart?" Jack studied him and the group around the table. "Of course, Jack," Mayor Rainey spoke up. Jack continued. "Then we'd do well to consider the positive aspects of this project. All this new traffic would mean many parents and grandparents would bring their children to Paradise Lake, which means the town would receive a lot of additional income from tourists who drive through. I would venture to say that new businesses would be created just because of the adventure park. Jack took a breath and hit home the point that he knew would pique the mayor's interest. This adventure park would also make our small town more visible in this state and across the nation. I believe there would be many new opportunities to connect with other mayors and government officials of different states. I do like that idea. The corners of Mayor Rainey's mouth turned up, and the star-gazed look in her eyes told Jack she was dreaming of all the possibilities. Jack knew the mayor was interested in influence and power, which was why he wanted to end his presentation at this point. They needed to have a few days to think about the possibilities. This is a good place to table this discussion and give everyone here more time to consider this proposal from all angles. Yes, I think that's a good idea, Jack. The mayor stood up and shook his hand. Thanks, Jack. You've given us a lot to think about. The Wolf brothers stood beside the mayor and stared at Jack, the scowls on their faces reminding him of circling predators. You're welcome, Mayor Rainey, and please take mock-ups of the project designs back to the town office to give you a better idea of what we discussed here today. Dunlin carried the mock-ups over and gave them to Mayor Rainey's assistant. Coggins saw to it that the mayor and her team were escorted to the door. Soon they drove off Jack's driveway and down the hill. Jack walked with Dunlin out the front door, eager to hear his thoughts. What do you think, Dunlin? Will the mayor accept our proposal? I think the lassie would be crazy not to accept it. But those two wolves who are circling her and us might mean the difference between whether we have a long or short battle on our hands. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Dunlin. Jack rubbed his bearded chin thoughtfully. He opened the door. We'll talk about it again next week. Jack stood there a moment, stuttering to finish his sentence. Bella, Dunlin's daughter, walked up to him. Big brown eyes looked up into his own. Her heart-shaped face was framed by brown hair that highlighted creamy smooth skin. Her cheeks flushed as she looked at him. Hello, Bella. Jack remembered the last time he'd seen her had been at Adam's wedding. He had to admit she looked even more beautiful now than she'd been back then. He also remembered that Bella had been one of those rare women who didn't even notice his scar. Hello, Mr. Stevenson. When Bella spoke his name in her light sing-song voice, Jack found himself drawn even more to her. Meanwhile, Jack kept his gaze on Dunlin's daughter. It's been a while. I hear you've been in college studying design. Yes, I've enjoyed it. Just finished my final exams, actually. Bella pushed back a stray tendril of hair that snuck its way out of her hair clip. He watched as Bella's father walked to the waiting car and set his things inside. Before he could stop himself, Jack blurted, You could come work here with your dad in the creative design department. As much as I appreciate your offer, Mr. Stevenson, I have a couple of job offers I'm looking at. Bella's polite refusal surprised and irked him. How could she say no to his offer? Her dad had worked for him for years. Did she know what she was giving up? And yet, his pride aside, her confident independence sparked an ember of admiration for her. I'd encourage you to take a look at what we offer here, Bella. The position won't be open indefinitely. I understand, Mr. Stevenson. My answer is the same. Jack nodded and saw that Bella's cheeks had turned a deep pink color. Well, if you change your mind, I'll give you my number to text or call. I'm sure that won't be... Here's my personal number. Jack interrupted her and stepped closer, handing her his card and speaking the number in her ear. Breathing deeply, he could smell a delightful mixture of garden and books. It was a heady combination. Got it. Thanks, Mr. Stevenson. Bella stepped away from him, her cheeks redder than before, if that were possible. Jack reached for her hand. And Bella? She peered up at him, a new wariness in her big, beautiful eyes. "It's not Mr. Stevenson. Please call me Jack." "I don't think that's a good idea," Bella objected. Jack could almost hear the argument in her head that he was her dad's boss. In some ways, Bella was a woman who liked to do things properly. She wouldn't like the idea of being too familiar with him. "You might not think it's a good idea, but I do. I'd like you to call me by my name." Bella folded her arms across her chest and narrowed her gaze. "Okay then, Jack." Large brown eyes looked up into his, filled with spark and fire. That flash of something ignited a deeper attraction. He didn't know how long he stood still, mesmerized by her. "My dad's waiting for me. Goodbye, Jack." Jack nodded abruptly, angry with himself for letting a beautiful face turn his head. Walking back inside the house, Jack closed the door and sighed. He was frustrated for letting down the carefully constructed walls around his heart, if only for a moment. What was he doing offering Bella a job and giving her his personal number? What was wrong with him? One thing was for sure. Bella stirred something in him that he wasn't ready for, something he might never be ready for. He needed to stay as far away from Bella as possible.